Reality revealed. India ended trade with America, turned toward China, and the world stood still for a moment trying to figure out how it happened, why it happened, and what this means for the balance of power on this planet. Now I want you to sit with this for a second, because when you say a nation like India, a nation with over 1 billion people, a nation that is now the 5th largest economy in the world, chooses to make such a seismic shift, you better believe it's not a random impulse. It's not an emotional outburst. It's a calculated move, a deep strategic decision, and it has the potential to shake the global order down to its roots. For decades, America assumed that every country must beg to sit at its table, every country must trade on its terms, every country must submit to its rules, its dollar, its sanctions, its world view. But India slowly and silently was rewriting the script, watching, learning, calculating, and when the moment came, it flipped the table and walked out of the room. And let me tell you something, this was not weakness, this was strength. This was not isolation, this was liberation. You see, America has lived on the myth that no nation can thrive without it, that access to its markets, its technology, its money, is oxygen. But the reality is different now. The reality is that India, with its manufacturing, with its software powerhouses, with its defense industries, with its global diaspora of professionals and entrepreneurs, no longer needs to breathe from someone else's oxygen tank. India learned to produce its own oxygen, and once you produce your own oxygen, you don't beg anyone for survival. That's why this move, cutting trade ties, turning to China for a new balance, wasn't about desperation, it was about independence. It was about saying we will not be chained anymore, we will not be manipulated anymore, we will not be told what to buy, what to sell, what to invest in, and what to abandon. India didn't just end a trade relationship, it ended a dependency. And that is far more powerful. Now let's talk about the psychology behind this. When a superpower feels untouchable, it becomes arrogant. It begins to believe it can sanction nations into obedience, it can threaten, it can dictate, it can lecture. But history is unforgiving. Empires always fall when they believe they are invincible. America thought India would never dare to turn its back because India had too much to lose. But let's be clear. India calculated that the losses of staying trapped were far greater than the short-term pains of breaking free. Sometimes you've got to bleed now so you don't suffocate later. India bled a little in the short run, but what it gained was dignity, sovereignty, and leverage. And once a nation tastes that kind of freedom, it doesn't go back to chains. That's why America was shaken. Not because India is their biggest trading partner, not because of immediate dollars and cents, but because India just demonstrated something terrifying to Washington, that you can walk away from America and not collapse. That's the nightmare they never wanted the world to see. People will say, why China? Why turn there? Isn't China the rival? Isn't China the competitor? Yes, but that's the beauty of strategy. Politics is not about emotions. It's about survival. India saw that the world was splitting, not into one superpower and the rest, but into multiple poles, multiple centers of gravity. Aligning with China on trade doesn't mean submission, it means diversification. It means India no longer has all its eggs in one basket, no longer tied to one financial system, no longer vulnerable to one country's tantrums. If America wants to weaponize the dollar, fine, India finds another currency. If America wants to block semiconductors, fine, India finds another supply chain. If America wants to threaten sanctions, fine, India creates alternate trade corridors. That's not betrayal, that's evolution. That's what nations must do when the old order becomes toxic. Now let's be real. America never expected this because they thought they had India locked down with technology, with defense deals, with diplomatic flattery. But India didn't fall for sweet talk. India remembered the betrayals, the moments when America tilted toward Pakistan, the lectures about human rights, the hypocrisy of supporting dictators elsewhere while preaching democracy in Delhi. India remembered being denied technology in the past, being sanctioned after nuclear tests, being pressured on foreign policy, and while India smiled at summits and shook hands at conferences, it was also building something behind the scenes. Building trade corridors with Central Asia, building ports in the Indian Ocean, building defense industries at home, building tech startups that don't need Silicon Valley approval. So when America thought India would never dare, India already had a backup plan. That's why this was shocking to the West, but not to those who had been watching closely. India had been preparing for this for decades. Think about this. America's strength is built on the dollar. Every transaction worldwide flows through their system. You cross them, they freeze your money, they choke your banking, they punish you. That's their invisible weapon. But what happens when a country like India says, we're done? We will trade in rupees, we will trade in yuan, we will trade in rubles, we will create our own systems. Suddenly the dollar is not a weapon anymore. Suddenly America can't punish at will. That's why this move is so huge, because once India takes that step, others will follow. The Middle East watches, Africa watches, Southeast Asia watches. Everyone wonders, if India can survive without America's trade, why can't we? That's how revolutions begin, not with guns, but with decisions. And India just lit the spark. Now don't get me wrong, this is not about hating America. It's about balance. For too long, the world was unbalanced. America called it globalization, but it was actually centralization with one nation at the center. India said no more. We want true globalization where no one dominates, no one dictates. That's why even turning to China is not about love, it's about balance. Because if two giants like India and China can set aside rivalry enough to build trade that bypasses American control, the game changes forever. And let me tell you, nothing terrifies Washington more than seeing its old divide and rule strategy fail. For decades they wanted India and China at each other's throats so that America could stay relevant. But now India says, we will compete, yes, but we will also cooperate where it benefits us. That's maturity, that's power. Let's talk economics. People think trade is about goods. No, it's about power. Whoever you depend on for chips, for energy, for finance, controls your destiny. India said we will not let America control our destiny anymore. When you end trade, you take the pain, but you also remove the leash. America thought tariffs and restrictions would scare India. Instead, they liberated India. Now India can buy oil from Russia without permission. Now India can sell software without worrying about American licenses. Now India can build defense systems without begging for parts. That's the essence of sovereignty. That's why this decision is not short-term economics. It's long-term freedom. And I want to tell you something about courage. Nations, like people, are tested. When you are tested, fear whispers in your ear, don't move, don't resist, don't risk. But courage whispers louder, better to fall on your feet than live on your knees. India chose courage. India chose to risk short-term comfort for long-term survival, and history always rewards courage. That's why this decision will be remembered, not as an act of defiance, but as an act of destiny. Because this is not just about trade, this is about shaping the century. America underestimated something crucial, the Indian spirit. This is a nation that endured colonization, endured partition, endured poverty, endured wars, and yet it rose. A nation like that doesn't bow forever. A nation like that eventually stands up and says enough. And when it says enough, the world feels the quake. That's what happened here. The reality revealed is not that India ended trade. The reality revealed is that India no longer fears America's shadow. And once that fear is gone, you can't control them anymore. So what comes next? Expect retaliation, expect pressure, expect narratives in the media painting India as reckless, dangerous, destabilizing. But that's the script they always run when someone refuses to obey. Don't be fooled. This is not chaos. This is creation. This is India carving a new path, forcing the world to adapt, forcing America to realize that it no longer owns the monopoly on power. And believe me, America will eventually have to come back to the table, this time not as a master, but as a partner. That's the shift India has created. People will ask, is this risky? Of course it's risky. But let me tell you, the bigger risk is to remain dependent, to live under someone else's conditions, to let your economy be weaponized against you. India chose the smarter risk, and this risk will inspire others. Nations in Africa tired of being exploited. Nations in Latin America tired of being manipulated. Nations in Asia tired of being dictated to. They will look at India and say, if they can do it, so can we. That's how you start a new world order, not through war, but through courage. The final truth is this: power respects power. America may shout, but deep down they know they can't bully India anymore. Because once you show you can walk away, you gain respect. And respect is more valuable than aid, more valuable than loans, more valuable than approval. Respect is the foundation of sovereignty. That's why India stands taller today, not because it turned to China, not because it ended trade, but because it proved to itself and the world that it is unafraid. And an unafraid India is the most powerful India the world has ever seen. It marked the birth of India's assertive military doctrine backed by innovation. This is not just about tanks, ships, or missiles. This is about an entire mindset shift where India no longer operates as a reactive power waiting to respond to aggression, but as a proactive power capable of setting the tempo of conflict, dictating the battlefield, and deterring rivals before they even make a move. For decades, India's defense posture was shaped by caution, hesitation, and a lack of access to global technology because of sanctions, embargoes, and dependence on outside suppliers. But over the last few decades, quietly, India was building the architecture of a defense ecosystem that would ensure no superpower could choke its progress again. When India ended trade with America and turned to other partners, it wasn't only about economics. It was the declaration that the nation now has the military and technological confidence to walk away from dependency. That's the core difference. This is no longer the India that can be pressured into compliance by threats of cutting off spare parts, sanctions, or denial of defense equipment. This is the India that designs its own hypersonic weapons, builds its own space-based surveillance, develops indigenous fighter jets, and leads in missile defense systems. This doctrine of assertive independence is the true revolution, and it is shaking the old order to its core, because when a nation like India says no to America, it's not a whisper, it's a thunderclap across continents. For a long time, America held on to the idea that nations had no choice but to obey, that the price of defiance was isolation, that refusing Washington meant economic collapse and military weakness. But what happens when a country defies that logic and instead rises stronger? What happens when sanctions fail to break you, when pressure fails to bend you, when threats fail to silence you? That's when the global narrative changes, because now other nations are watching India, studying India, learning from India. They're realizing that America's greatest weapon, the illusion of inevitability, is fading. The illusion that only by aligning with Washington could you prosper, only by trading on its terms could you rise, only by depending on its systems could you survive. That illusion has been shattered, and India was the hammer you see. What makes this moment historic is not just that India pivoted economically, but that it did so while simultaneously strengthening its security doctrine. Nations are not respected because of their speeches, they are respected because of their power. And India has been weaving together a fabric of power made from innovation, from resilience, from strategy. It's not just a matter of building weapons, it's about mastering the ecosystem. Satellite navigation systems that can guide missiles without relying on GPS. Indigenous fighter aircraft that cannot be grounded by foreign spare part bans. Cyber defense networks that prevent surveillance. And defense corridors that employ millions while producing cutting-edge arms. That's why India can now say no, because no one can pull the plug on its survival anymore. This doctrine of self-sufficiency is the ultimate insurance policy, and it makes India fearless in the global arena. Consider the psychology of deterrence. For decades, India relied on restraint as its shield. But restraint without capability is weakness, and weakness invites aggression. The new doctrine flips that equation. Now India doesn't only promise restraint, it promises punishment for violation. It promises retaliation with speed and precision. When you have hypersonic missiles tested, nuclear submarines prowling silently, space-based reconnaissance mapping every inch of hostile territory, your rivals think twice before testing your patience. And when the world sees you possess this kind of arsenal built on your own innovation, they realize your sovereignty is untouchable. America underestimated how fast India was climbing this ladder. While Washington was distracted with its endless wars in the Middle East, India was building partnerships with Russia for advanced missile tech, with France for jet propulsion, with Israel for drones, with its own scientists for space research. Slowly, piece by piece, it created a defense web that cannot be undone. That's why today India can end a dependency with confidence. Because its shield is strong and its sword is sharp, the narrative that India has birthed is bigger than itself. This is about inspiration for nations across Africa, across South America, across Southeast Asia. For too long, these regions have lived under the assumption that resisting America means ruin. But India has demonstrated that saying no doesn't just preserve dignity, it unlocks growth. It forces nations to innovate, forces them to discover their own potential, forces them to unite with others on equal footing. India's military doctrine is part of this wider story because military independence is the final step to political independence. You cannot stand tall globally if your security is borrowed. India doesn't borrow anymore, and that's the message others are hearing loud and clear. There's another layer here that people often miss. This doctrine is not about aggression, it's about balance. India doesn't want endless wars. India doesn't seek invasion. India doesn't crave domination. What it seeks is to never be dominated, never be dictated to, never be silenced. Its doctrine is a shield that ensures its economic and cultural rise cannot be sabotaged. And this shield is not just metal and firepower, it's brains. Innovation is the real weapon. India's software engineers, defense scientists, and space researchers are rewriting the rules of global security. Artificial intelligence in defense, autonomous drone swarms, quantum communication, and missile defense systems that rival any in the West. These are not dreams anymore. These are realities born out of necessity. And necessity, as history has shown, always creates the sharpest innovations. That's why the doctrine India now carries is not just about matching others. It's about leapfrogging them. It's about refusing to be trapped in yesterday's frameworks and instead building tomorrow's systems. Think about how symbolic this is. Once upon a time, India couldn't even buy a computer without foreign approval. Today it launches satellites cheaper and faster than NASA. It builds aircraft carriers. It creates its own GPS system. And it trains cyber warriors capable of defending against the most advanced digital threats. That transformation didn't happen overnight, but it happened because India refused to remain dependent forever. And when a nation evolves like this, the entire global conversation shifts. Now, when America threatens a nation with sanctions, that nation can look at India and say, if they could survive, so can we. When Washington says no one can thrive without our trade, the world can point to India and say, look, they just did. This narrative is powerful because it challenges the psychological stranglehold America had over the world. Fear was their greatest weapon. India just broke that weapon in half. The doctrine is assertive, but also intelligent. It doesn't rush into conflicts recklessly, but it also doesn't shy away. It signals to Pakistan that cross-border terror will not be tolerated. It signals to China that incursions will be met with force, and it signals to the West that pressure campaigns will be resisted. All of this backed by a credible arsenal and credible willpower. That credibility is what changes equations in geopolitics. Rivals respect you not because you speak loudly, but because they know you can act decisively. Friends respect you not because you flatter them, but because they know you stand independently. That's what India has built, and that's what America failed to see coming. So when India ended trade with America, it wasn't just an economic pivot, it was the unveiling of a deeper confidence. A confidence that comes only when your military doctrine is secure, when your innovation pipeline is unbroken, and when your nation is mentally prepared to face pressure without crumbling. This confidence is contagious. It spreads across borders. It whispers to smaller nations, you can do this too. And once enough nations believe that, the old order collapses, not through war but through disobedience. Because the greatest revolution in global politics is when nations stop obeying out of fear. That's the birth of a new narrative, and India is the author. This narrative matters because it rewrites power itself. For centuries, power meant colonizing armies, control of seas, control of trade routes. Then it meant control of finance, control of technology, control of weapons. But in this century, power means independence of choice, the ability to say no without collapsing. That's what India has demonstrated. By building an assertive military doctrine rooted in innovation, India earned the right to say no. And by saying no, it proved that the world doesn't end, in fact it begins anew. It proved that sovereignty is not a luxury, it is survival. And that lesson will outlive this moment, because it plants the seed of courage in every capital across the globe that is tired of bowing down, tired of living under someone else's shadow, tired of believing the myth that without America, they cannot rise stronger.